lifestyle, self-healing habits, and the mindsets that come with it. Well, we've talked about your metabolism, nutrition, medication, and all, how those things contribute. I had no idea that your mind also can help you self-heal. Well, it's not for me to say. Chris Aboje is here. He is a consultant psychologist, consultant clinical psychologist. He's also International Employee Assistance Program consultant. Thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
We've talked about self-healing habits for 2 straight weeks. And how does psychology help in that regard? Psychology is not healing self, you see.
Okay. So I actually think that, so let me use the word mental health instead in place of psychology. But I think it's at the center of your physical well-being and your social well-being.
Really?
And I think a good way to look at it is the definition of health. Health is not the absence of illness, but it's a complete state of physical, mental, and social well-being. Oh. That means you're not healthy just because you have a sound physical well-being. You need to have your mental well-being as well as your social well-being as well.
You have to have PMS.
PMS. That's a good way to look at it. Yeah, you have to have PMS. Yes. Okay. Yes, exactly.
So, but then, I mean, you say it's right there in between. Mm-hmm. Okay. So, but how does that help healing of the body?
Well, so there are a lot of there are schools of thoughts that believe that our cells listen to our thoughts and they respond.
Pause, please. The cell,
the human cell, yes.
This is one that made up my body. Mm-hmm. They have ears.
They have ears.
Oh, really?
In fact, I think a better way to look at it is that the human body keeps scores. So every experience you have is registered in your cells, your DNA, your genes. And very importantly, maybe a more biological way to look at it is that your thoughts determine the kind of neurotransmitters, the chemicals your brain would secrete. Take, for example, if I'm thinking pleasant thoughts, my brain is going to secrete pleasant chemicals that correspond with the thoughts. If I'm thinking unpleasant thoughts, my brain is also going to secrete unpleasant chemicals. Now, I'm intentionally not saying bad or good chemicals. I'm using the word unpleasant because of the way they feel and also because of their long-term effects generally. Let me give a practical example with anxiety, for example. Anxiety is supposed to be a normal survival emotion that helps us to protect us from risk and threat. So if I had a thought that something bad would happen, right, or something bad could happen, what you're going to notice is that my body or my brain would start to secrete stress chemicals to prepare me for that danger. Whoa. Now, in the short run or short term, it's not a bad thing because it increases my body metabolism. It makes me stronger, faster. I'm operating on a supernatural level, right? But the problem is that within that process, my immunity is suppressed as well. Right? But not just that my immunity is suppressed, some of my vital organs or my important functions like sleep, appetite, interest in pleasurable activities, they are also suppressed as well. And if that goes on over a long period of time, it leads to my cells dying. Oh. Right? So my cells begin to die, and in some cases, because the immune system is affected, what you see is that the immunity cannot perform its police role, which is goes around and take care of things that shouldn't be there. You can't do that because it's suppressed. And that means that I'm more susceptible to illnesses. And that's why you see that when people begin to fall ill frequently, some people do that. They fall ill frequently, they go to the hospital, the doctor does all the checks and says, hey, we can't see anything. And now they start to think it's household wickedness and stubborn pushers, but it could just be stress because something is going on in their perception that has affected what the body is doing. And that leads to illnesses.
We both know that what you're saying, it sounds very fantastic, right? Mm-hmm. Particularly because a good number of people will be wondering, what's this fella talking about? He's talking like a the motivational speaker. Think positive thoughts and all those things. It's balderdash in some people's dictionary. But so if you're saying that these thoughts are these important, there are quite a number of ways in which we receive these perceptions, what you hear, what you smell sometimes, what you perceive in your from your eyes, even the touch you get, they have their impact on the body. Is this public knowledge?
Well, not necessarily. It's not. Yes, I know that, we have our fantastic friends, the motivational speakers, who will tell you about positive thoughts. And I agree with that almost maybe 90%, right? But I think that there's also something missing in that conversation, which is that when we talk about positive thought, people think that what we're saying is ignore the circumstance, right? But that's not what a psychologist is going to tell you. A psychologist will tell you to acknowledge the circumstance, right? But rather than just focusing only on the problem, you need to be able to change your thoughts to focus on solutions, whereby I'm saying, hey, I recognize this is not what I want, but what can I do about it? Because that is more proactive. That means that I'm working towards changing the situation rather than just sitting down there and dwelling on those negative thoughts. Now, typically, I like to say to people that those, in quotes, unpleasant emotions we secrete or we experience during those times when we're thinking, oh, there's a problem here, there's a problem there, are not necessarily bad. And that's why I used unpleasant, because they are designed to help you change the situation. Right? That's the original design. Anxiety is designed to help you protect yourself from risk. Anger is designed to help you change situations. Maybe if you're treated unfairly, you're being disrespected, or someone is preventing you from achieving a goal, you experience anger because it's designed to help you do something about it. Sadness is designed to help you identify, define problems, and then think about solutions. The challenge is that many people don't know how to use this, and so you see that these emotions linger longer than necessary, and then they begin to hurt us.
Now, speak to that. I like you to expatiate on that a little. So when someone gets angry, it's an alteration of the mental state.
Yes.
When you have anxiety, it's an alteration of the mental state, right?
Yeah, alteration almost makes it sound like abnormally. But
well, it alters the normal balance.
Exactly.
I mean, that's...
Exactly.
Don't worry, I'm trying to to speak like you, not to use bad English,
yes.
so to speak, But people don't see these things the way you're talking about it.
Yes.
When someone gets angry, they say, don't be angry, don't be angry, it's not good to be angry, and all those things. Or someone is just fretting over something. I mean, people don't know how to draw the line, for instance, between thinking and worrying, and that's which is what anxiety sometimes ends up being. So what perceptions about people, what's perceptions of people about these emotions that you talk about, these seemingly negative emotions, should people change in order to use anger, which is perceived to be bad, as a good thing, anxiety as a good thing, and the rest?
Well, I think we need to be able to see that it's not the emotion that is the bad thing, it's the expression of the emotion that could be bad. It's how you express the emotion. I can be anxious, and I think I get anxious, right? I think everybody gets anxious from time to time, but what I could do when I get anxious is to analyze the situation and say to myself, what is the risk here? And what can I do to mitigate the risk? The challenge with that is that many people expect to remove the risk totally, which is impossible. So they get stuck there. So it's about, how do you express the emotion? How do you express the sadness? How do you express the anger?
Let's be practical, Mr. Boje. So someone has a rent to pay. It was just, I think it was in the course of this week, that we found out that the average cost of is it 2-bedroom or 3-bedroom in Kano State, Kano, is 2 million naira. And so someone right now in Kano, his rent is due, and everything has risen to literally consume all of his expectations about raising that rent and all. Now, naturally, this fellow is anxious. The only thing he wants to do is to remove that risk completely, the risk of being homeless. He wants to remove that risk completely. So when you say, you don't want to remove the risk completely, he's wondering what you're talking about.
Sometimes you might be able to, but it's important that you don't focus on removing it totally, because what of situations where you can't? let's look at that situation of somebody who has a rent of 2 million to pay, but doesn't have the money to pay. Now, this is what people don't want to hear, but this comes back to rational thinking, is that, what do I do about this? There's a risk here. The risk is that I might end up on the streets, but what do I do about it? Do I now look at what the material that I have and cut my clothes according to that material? So I say to myself, I can't afford 2 million naira rent, right? I know that, yes, I have some status to maintain, but is it possible that I reduce or go
that
to
overhead,
go to a smaller apartment and start planning towards eventually getting back there in future, right? That is rational. But what that would do for me is that it will reduce the risk of ending up in the streets, right? That is what the emotion is designed to help you do. But when you focus alone on, I'm going to end up on the street, I'm going to end up on the street, you wouldn't do much about it, and then you might eventually end up on the streets.
Okay, help us understand the difference between and how to use or approach thinking as opposed to worrying. What's the difference between the two? Just someone, because someone needs, I'm thinking. I've been thinking. You're not thinking, you're worrying. Or is he thinking?
Well, some of the techniques that I'm going to share are techniques that many people try to avoid. They want quick fix.
Of course.
And that's where the
That's why we like fast food.
Exactly. That's where the mindset and self-healing practices come in. Is that, hey, there's nothing like quick fix. We need to first disabuse that thought of, I need to fix things fast. We need to understand that everything will take a process, including the healing of your body. If you want your body to heal, you will not just heal. And I see that in therapy when people come in and you're trying to, they say, I want this to be fixed now. But when you tell them, just be patient with the process. It may take a couple of weeks, but you're able to get the result. So in that situation, a person is experiencing anxiety or experiencing worry. I don't think that's a problem. Again, it comes back to, what are you doing with it? Am I staying stuck on the problem, right? Or am I staying stuck on the risk? Or am I trying to just avoid the risk totally? These are the things you need to look at. So the first thing I would do in that situation is to define what this risk is. Let me even identify it. What's this risk? I might end up on the street, looking at that example. That's the risk, right? The next thing I want to do is that, is this true? Is it possible that I can end up on the street? If it's not possible, maybe I'm expecting 10 million naira, before the end of the month. That means my anxiety might not be based on reality, right? So I might eventually just reassure myself and push it aside. But if I look around and realize, hey, nothing is coming, then I go back to saying to myself, so what plan can I put in place? Do I want to talk to somebody to help me raise this money? But if I do that, how long will I keep on talking to somebody? Or do I want to think about a business venture to get into? Do I want to think about another way of raising money going forward? Do I want to so this is now you coming up with a plan. Now, that is different from just worrying. Worrying is you just staying stuck with the problem. Now, the disadvantage is that many people don't do it intentionally, whereby it's just running in their head. So from one problem, they move to another one, and that's when it becomes a problem. So I can start with the rent, and I can move on to the country. And I realized that, that's how my friend promised me money and refused to give me. So I say, people are not even trustworthy. So I move on from one thought to the other, to another, without actually solving the real problem. Now, when I keep on doing that, my body is secreting chemicals. Right? My body is secreting chemicals like cortisol, like adrenaline. These are stress chemicals that would, in turn, affect my immunity, would in turn increase my body metabolism. So I'm not just predisposing myself to just worry alone, I'm also predisposing myself to a health condition eventually. Right? So you see that there's a connection between, and going back to what we said, it could also lead to me making wrong decisions, for example. Right? I could make wrong decisions. For example, if somebody at work then promises me that, hey, Chris, if you can just sign this thing and we will give you this money, even though I know it's illegal, but right now I'm now under pressure to make that wrong decision, which is social. It could also lead to me, the guy that promised me 2 million, that has been my good friend for years. Now I don't want to talk to him anymore because he refused to give me the 2 million. Now it's affecting my relationships. In other cases, it can even affect my spirituality because now I'm thinking, God doesn't love me. Can you see? And that's why I said when we started that your mental well-being is at the center. It can not just only affect your physical well-being, but also your social well-being as well.
It's even interesting that you brought God in now. So it leads me to clergymen and of whatever faith and the things that they say to their people, how they mobilize, how they influence the minds of their people. So you've talked about the mind as the mental well-being, as a catalyst for good health, physical body. Someone watching now and listening to you might say, oh, really? So I really don't need all those medications. I don't even need to go to a hospital. So I can just listen to this man, think positive thoughts, and my body will heal itself. Yes or yes?
So that's tricky. That's very tricky. It's very tricky because on one end, right, when you think about countries that have the highest life expectancy, take number 2, for example, Japan, you realize that one reason is the lifestyle, right? What they eat, the activity, the kind of way they process things. That is so, to an extent, if you put all these things in place, it could increase your life expectancy and reduce the tendency of falling ill. And you saw that with our great-grandfathers and the likes, where they lived up to 100 and something without even the advantage of technology that we have today. But there's a risk. The risk is that many of us have actually subjected our body to a lot of stress, right? We have hurt ourselves, we have affected our organs, and we have gotten to a point where we then need extra support or extra help to heal. That's where medications come in. And that's why I think God gave us the wisdom to create those, because maybe he anticipated that at some point these guys would do damage to themselves. So let's have something in case that happens. So medications are still very important. Medical care is still very important. But then, looking at from the perspective of religion, there was a research I was doing at some point called Religion and Healing, which really focused more on how the mind can initiate healing for you. And you see that a lot with even, now some preachers might come from my head right now, but you see that with, prayer, with faith. A lot of those things come with the mind. If you don't, they'll tell us that if you don't have faith, it's difficult for you to get healed. What is faith? Where does faith come from? Faith is a function of your soul, which is a function of your mind. And so that's why also some religious book, I think one religious book says that you are transformed by the renewal of your mind. So it means that you need to feed your mind something that helps the body regenerate.
Good content.
Exactly.
Or should I say good medication?
Exactly.
That the mind will use.
Exactly.
Okay.
The challenge I see with religion is that many religious leaders do not understand the science behind it. Now, the same way I'm talking and I'm saying, hey, you can't rule out this, you can't rule out this because I see a connection. Many of them don't know this, and so they would speak only on the fact that, oh, just think positive thoughts or just, be grateful and do all that without knowing that there's also that link. And when you listen just to one side of the story, you might miss it. So I would say that clergymen should be able to look at it from a holistic perspective, that sometimes some people might not have the faith to get that healing. Some people might have damaged some organs or some cells to an extent where they need extra help. And that's where you need to, it's a collaborative effort. I don't rule out spirituality and religion, but I think that it's a collaborative effort.
Okay. Lastly, what adjustment would you propose that some people watching you right now would make to help propel their self-healing through, engaging their mind?
Awesome. I think start with the mindset that your health and your body is important, right? We say this a lot, but I don't think many people understand the impact of this, because knowing this means that you can now prioritize your well-being with almost everything that you do. It's like almost everything you're doing, you're asking yourself, how does this impact my well-being? So that's the first place to start. Now, the other thing you now need to do when you get there is to then understand, I need to be aware of how my body works. I need to be aware of what my body does. So we say that your body keeps scores. So you need to check in every day and say, how am I feeling today? What's happening? Because before your body gets to a point where it breaks down or you're hurt, it will give you signs. You just didn't listen. So cultivate that habit of checking in. Hey, what's happening? How am I doing today? And then move on to some practices, like very common practice, and I'm sure we've repeated this over and over again. Practice around sleep. Very important. You need to prioritize sleep. It's not a waste of time because it's important to all the healing we talked about. Your diet, what you eat. You want to avoid a lot of sugar. Sugar is dangerous. You want to avoid highly processed oil meals, your fast foods and all that. You can have cheat days where you just say to yourself, I want to just allow myself, but don't make it a regular, and then practice the act of connecting with people. We're a social being. We need to have people. You're an introvert yet, but you still need one person or two you can reach out to so that you don't feel you're alone. And then finally, the practice of focusing on things that are working, not every time things will go for you the same way you want it, but you need to intentionally say, hey, I recognize that it's not working the way I want it, but I still recognize that ABCD is working. Gratitude, that's what people call it, right? Doing things that you love, doing things that make you feel good about yourself, focusing on the bright side of life. These things help your body secrete pleasant chemicals and can protect you and also help you heal eventually.
Well, thank you so much this morning. This conversation has only just ignited one other thing, which is addiction. That's another country on its own, which we can't get into today. Chris Aboje, consultant, clinical psychologist, as well as International Employee Assistance Program consultant. Thank you so much for your time this morning. Truly appreciate it.
It's a pleasure. Always.
When we return, it's time for the home stretch. I don't know whether we'll go to the National Assembly, but hey, we'll be right back.